Hi, I'm Diana Yoakley. I'm a peaceful parenting coach and mom of three, and I'm delighted to give you the latest science-backed research on child development, parenting, and to support you in showing up as the parent that you want to be. Welcome. Right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Delight in Parenting podcast. I am your host, Diana Yoakley, and I'm really excited to have here with me Dr. B. So, Dr. Bethany Bilodeau, welcome. So
Thank
nice to have you here
you.
today.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm really excited to have you because your expertise is really something that I enjoy talking about on my podcast, and we can never get enough of nerdy science around the brain and parenting connections. And just the nitty gritty of the science, I think, is always fun. So, Dr. Bethany is a behaviorist and sensory specialist who works at the intersection of trauma, neurodiversity, and nervous system regulation. Her practice focuses on helping parents shift from traditional behavior management approaches to co creating safety and regulation with their children, particularly those who present as oppositional, anxious, or withdrawn. And drawing from neuroscience research, lived experience, and evidence based interventions, Dr. B provides caregivers with practical tools to understand the underlying needs driving their children's behavior through her heart centered, connection focused methodology. So I'm really excited to have you here today because that's exactly what I'm always talking to parents about, is looking under the iceberg at what is the unmet need, what is driving the behavior. The behavior is the clue to some deeper unmet need. And so, yeah,
100%.
would love to
Yeah.
kind of start off with that. I would love to hear your story about what inspired you to specialize in this field and how you got started here.
Yeah, never intended to enter this field or to work in this area at
Mhm.
all. I actually started my career. I had worked in hospitals with mothers who were neurodivergent, who had just given birth to babies, helping to
Mm,
make sure that they had the skills needed to care for the infants and that sort of thing. And then when I got my teaching degree, I taught biology and earth science for a period of time.
amazing.
And then had started having kiddos of my own, and my own son really struggled, the oldest of my four children, and he was asked to leave three different daycares. And you know how that goes. The first daycare, you're like, maybe it's a fluke. The second daycare, you're like,
Hmm.
what's going on? Third daycare, when they're like, he's the kid that bites, and you're like, oh yeah, that's my kid. You get that call, and you're like, oh, please don't.
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
even want to answer the phone. I'm sure every parent can relate to that. The school calls, and you're like,
Yeah.
do I want to answer it? I really don't. You're like,
Good news or bad news?
no.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily want to say who you are and that sort of.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was asked to leave a number of daycare settings, and at that point, I said something else is going on, and we had him evaluated. He definitely had some things that were some developmental challenges that were occurring. Definitely had some issues with his nervous system being regulated. He was a preemie. We see this a lot with kiddos with medical histories and things like that.
Hmm.
And then so he got some therapies through that, and I found a school that actually specialized in sensory supports for kids, and it was like I walked in and
Night and day.
this is my happy place. I could live here.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
and he, just was able to thrive there. And by the time he entered public school setting, and by the time he was in about sixth or seventh grade, they exited him from special education services because he had basically accomplished all of the goals and was able to just function in the general education setting 100% of the time. So,
Yeah.
which was great, but not without a million different challenges and a thousand different things that we did, and so
Yeah.
many any training that was out there. I am the nerdiest of nerds. We could have just cut that bio really short, and you could have just said she's a big nerd, and we're all good.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, because I mean, I love that because when we have more knowledge about these topics, we have more power over like our own, outcomes and what we can
Yeah.
influence. And I
Yeah.
love in your story about your son is that you did early intervention. And I know that the research shows that when we intervene with sensory modalities like occupational therapy and the different therapies earlier rather than later, the brain actually develops more integration, and you can basically like work on healing that, versus if you start in 6th or 7th grade, now they're already like 11, 12, 13, or whatever old they are.
Right.
And now it's a lot harder to rewire that brain, even
So
if
hard.
it's a
Yeah.
sensory, imbalance in the
Yeah.
brain.
I often tell families, like, if I'm going into a school, if it's elementary, I'll probably be there a few weeks. If it's middle school, I'm going to be there a few months. If it's high school,
Yeah.
it might take me a year or so. Yeah, the earlier
Mhm.
on we can provide those interventions and get those skills taught, definitely the more help and the less harm there is to the self-esteem, and the less time as a parent that we say, what did I do? How
Right.
did I do this wrong? And beating ourselves up over that, because it's so hard for us not to let that guilt and shame go of, I must have caused it. I did something
Right.
wrong, sort of thing. And we've all been there. And,
Mhm.
it's just one of those toughest roles that we ever experience in our life. And I feel like every time I've had a situation happen with my kiddos, I felt like, this is here to teach me something. So what is,
Right.
I have to figure that out
Right.
and move forward
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, we talk a lot about self-compassion on my podcast because you have to have such a large dose of it, especially if your child struggles, because of the negativity bias and blaming ourselves kind of automatically, whereas it's
Yeah.
like, okay, how can we solve
Yeah.
this problem instead of
It's
beat ourselves up about it?
100%. It's so hard for parents then to also go into an environment like a school environment or even a therapeutic setting and try to advocate for their kids at times because they feel like I've done things wrong. So, and then they
Hmm.
question themselves and their own, like when something doesn't sound right, like someone says, oh, we're going to do this. And their gut feeling just says, that's probably not right for my kid. And they have a harder time saying, I don't think that that's right for my child. But the parent knows the child best. Your gut instinct is probably the right one. So
Hmm.
definitely honor that, and make sure that you
Yeah.
express how you're feeling with that, because you need to be able to work through those things. If you don't feel like it's going to work, it's not. So you spend the
Hmm.
time with your child.
Yeah. 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 I love that parenting confidence. Yeah, and there's so many things I want to talk to you about, but we'll see how much we can get into our conversation today. So you describe yourself as working at the intersection of trauma, neurodiversity, and nervous system regulations. And for parents who might be new to these concepts, can you help us understand a little bit more about what these words really mean and why it matters for everyday parenting?
Yeah, and the biggest thing we bring it back to is safety. And I was interesting. I was doing a training just recently for foster care parents, and they were saying, "Are these techniques good for kids with trauma, Bethany, and neurodivergent kids, and so on and so forth?" And I said, "Yes, every technique. Granted, watch your child. There's always an exception to the rule, but every technique we do honors where that person is at and really speaks to how are we going to interact with them to make them feel safe." Because at the root of most things, it's not just that the individual is dysregulated, it's also that they don't feel safe, in certain environments, either from overstimulation, understimulation. It could be past medical issues. It could be toxicities in their body. There's so many reasons why, but for some reason, their body does not feel safe. So getting them to feel safe is always the first step. And we usually do that by teaching what's called the stance of safety. And that is when you're standing with your feet about shoulder width apart, your hips and feet are pointed at the person so that they know you're attending. Your hands
Uh-huh.
in front of you, they have to be able to see the hands. It's a big one. People don't feel safe when they can't see the other person's hands. So the hands are in front of you, thumbs are slightly lifted because that conveys confidence. Even though the person can't tell you that, it does convey confidence to the other person, which says to them, I can keep you safe. Not just
Hmm.
you're safe, but I can co-regulate with you. I can help
Hmm.
you feel regulated. I can help you feel safe. We tilt the
Hmm.
head slightly to the left because that conveys empathy. Um,
Mm.
Educators tilt their heads to the right because
Interesting.
that conveys intelligence. I don't need to be smart. I just need to have feels.
My head was definitely tilting more to the right now. I don't know why, but I'll have to pay
People are
attention
like,
to that.
my left, your left, are you mirrored image?
Yeah.
It's your left. Yeah.
I'm mirroring you in the reflection, which you're going left and I'm going
Yeah.
right.
So those are all really key elements to that, lifting the chin and those things. But most of the time, when you walk into a situation, if your kid doesn't feel safe and they're like, no, I don't want to do that, so on and so forth, most of the refusal comes from, I don't feel safe with that situation,
Mhm,
or it's a non-preferred. And in that case, then we want to just present it in a way that makes it a preferred as much as possible.
mhm,
But a lot of times it's about not feeling safe. My youngest daughter, a lot of medical challenges when she was born. I adopted her and she does not like things. She does not like change. She doesn't like, things out of the ordinary. We have to do a lot of setup for those sorts of things as far as making her feel really safe, having a lot of connection with me before she goes to new environments and those sorts of things because she's very, very much introverted and really struggles with new environments, especially with a lot of sensory information coming in, sound, especially very
mm,
auditory sensitive. So we have to really
mhm,
work with that and make sure that it's lower volume or we're standing off to the side for long periods of time before we integrate into it and that sort of thing. And when her body shows me that she's ready. So the shoulders start to relax. She's curious. I can tell by her stance and from her chin placement that she's attending and she's curious about what's going on with someone else. That's when I know, okay, we can connect and move to the next step. But make
mm.
sure that you
Yeah, a lot of
first.
cues. You're picking up on a lot of cues and reading nonverbal and verbal body language from the child. And and yeah, I wanted just to back up just a little bit to say what you were saying about it's all about safety. So when we're thinking about a child that's experienced trauma, safety is key for
Mhm.
transformation.
Yeah.
Neurodiversity, they're born like that, but safety is key.
Still need to feel safe.
Nervous
Yeah. A
system
lot of
dysregulation,
exactly
safety is
the
key. So
nervous.
these are like, this is the foundation for really all of these different types of categories, I guess,
Yeah.
of, um,
Yep, safety's always the first one. I had
mhm,
someone recently, I was doing a training and they asked me about like, what do you do when this happens with compliance? And I said, it's tough because so many models are still rooted in compliance. Education is still rooted in compliance. There's a lot of times in my household where I'm like, you need to just do this. This is something you gotta take a shower. You smell like a stinky foot, and those sorts of things. But the compliance is tough. If we're asking for compliance and we're not giving an opportunity to question that, ooh, we are re-traumatizing, kiddos that have had trauma histories, individuals oftentimes that have had that are neurodiverse and have had experiences that have created traumas as well, that asking for compliance without um, any thought of question and safety that we don't, that's not it's not something we wanna do. We wanna make them feel safe enough so that they can say, "I don't feel
mhm,
comfortable with this. This isn't what I wanna do right now." Okay, so how can we work with this situation so that you can get it done? You can do what you need to do.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and many of our listeners are drawn to this connection-based parenting because connection is safety.
It is.
Connection is like safety and action in relationship, right? Between parent and child, especially and including children that might be oppositional, anxious, shut down. No matter what the root of it is, that's the behavior. Connection is the strategy for safety. And from a neuroscience perspective, what's happening in these moments when we think about and we're kind of talking about it, but if you wanted to add anything else regarding
So
when
there's
parents shift from managing compliance, like you said, to more about co-creating safety and
Yes,
regulation.
so that allows a lot more access to different areas of the brain. Like a lot of times parents will say to me like, what happens when they're refusing or when they get stuck? Like they often use that expression when they get stuck. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk about that because when you get stuck, what ends up happening is this area of the brain called the anterior cingulate gyrus. That's the area of the brain that allows you to move from one area to the other. That part of the brain doesn't shift. And so they get stuck in that area. So even if they don't want to refuse, they're kind of stuck in this refusal zone. So a strategy of dealing with that is provide what the expectation is and give them some time to let it settle into the subconscious. And it doesn't have to be a long time, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, then transition. Or give them what the expectation is and then distract them for that time period. Then ask them to do that. Does it take some pre-planning? Yes. Are we always capable of doing that? No. But you do the best you can with what you got. And you keep
Yeah.
in mind, okay, my particular kiddo needs to transition at this other time. for kids who have a high level of anxiety and just seem like, ooh, that anxiety is keeping them, they're running through thought patterns of, now I'm thinking about this bad thing could happen, this bad thing could happen, so on and so forth. They're part of their brain called the basal ganglia is really on high alert. That area of the brain is very, very excitable. So we need to get blood to the other areas of the brain that might help that. So some things that we could do would be just do rhythmic movement, play ball with them for a few minutes while you're talking about what's going to happen or something like that, or do a couple dance moves or take a walk. If you've got a teen, oftentimes if you've got something you got to talk about and it's going to be a struggle, be like, hey, I got to take the dog for a walk for a few minutes. Come with me. Taking the dog.
I have 3 dogs, so
Yeah.
I have lots of chances to go for chats with my kids. 3 kids and 3 dogs, one per kid.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have three also. And so it gives them that opportunity though to connect also with the pet, which can really be helpful
Therapeutic.
regulator. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's like the mammalian, again, like co-regulation connection. And dogs are very,
They're great at
like,
that.
yeah.
They do good work. I used to tell my service dog,
Affirming.
yeah, I used to tell my service dog all the time. I'd be like, we pay you in chicken nuggets. You do a really good job and you earn your keep, girlfriend.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So what you're saying, when they are stuck in resistance and rigidity, sometimes parents try to kind of like push through that really hard. But
Yeah.
instead, what's might be helpful is instead of pushing that muscle even more, it's already stressed. Let's activate some other muscles to kind of help lift the entirety by shifting gears a little bit and then taking the weight off
Absolutely.
of it a little bit.
I mean, we tend to want to go back to let me just say the expectation again in a more forceful way. And what that actually does is it undermines our own authority instead of encouraging them to
Mhm.
get it done. If you've got a kiddo that's really going to dig in. So it's ends up really backfiring so much instead of getting them forward. So I often
Mhm.
say, don't make a request unless you know that they're going to follow through on it. If they're not going to follow
Mhm.
through on
Yeah.
it, go with the power of momentum, use some behavioral momentum and use the power of threes. If you can get them to do 2, 3 things, and chances are you can get them to do the tougher expectation. But, hand me that, pick this up, whatever it may be, and then ask the more challenging thing, that the expectation that you want.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it can be so hard sometimes, I think, as parents. And we talk about self-compassion a lot on the show as well. Um, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like, how does a parent, it's very emotionally overwhelming to do this work with sensitive
It
kids and kids with the background and just, any one of these, like we said, trauma, neurodiversity, nervous system regulation, or any other reason why your child might be feeling threatened internally, externally. It's hard for the parent to deal with this on an ongoing basis. So, how does a parent's
is.
relationship with themselves, as we think about how we relate to our own nervous system and how we reflect on what states we're in, how does that impact our ability to support our kids
For
and
100.
mindfulness? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they pick up on all of our energy and on everything that's going on. And my 12-year-old is very, very aware. Like if I walk into a room and I just have an odd expression on my face or something, like, and it has nothing to do with her. But I'm probably just, interacted with the staff, or there was a situation that I was a little bit worked up on, and I'm pretty careful about that stuff. But she'll say, "What's wrong with you, mom? What happened? What's wrong?" And I'll have to be like, I'm fine, girl. This is your time now, and park that
Yeah.
at the door." But it's so hard as a parent, and it's so hard in your own home to remember to do that, because you can't be on all the time. It's tiring,
Mhm.
especially when you're dealing with the same challenges. I always tell parents
Yeah.
and educators, work with the behaviors that are going to drive you crazy the most. Like, work with those first, because those are the ones that are going to frustrate you and use up all of your energy and all of your love.
Mhm.
So work with those first, then move on to the other stuff. Because if it makes you insane, one thing that they do, then it's really hard to interact with them at other times. I always tell the story of Noah in the burp, one of my other sons. he used to love to, the middle school thing when they can burp on command, and for super long periods of time. And at one point I was like, I'm gonna get rid of the burp. I'm done with it. So I was like, yeah, we were in the car and I was like, hey Noah. And he looks up at me and I'm like, hey, I really appreciate that you didn't burp for the last 30 seconds. So what does he do? The loudest, longest burp of his life, like "Bah!" It lasted like 10 minutes, the other kids in the front seat laughing like crazy. And I drop him off at soccer practice and I'm like, oh man, Noah won, mom zip, and the next day I'm like, okay, I'm going to try the same thing, but I'll do it at a transition. That's a key point. You got to do it at a transition when you're trying to get rid of some of those behaviors. So he goes to get out of the car and I'm like, hey, Noah, what? And I said, I noticed for the last few minutes you haven't burped. I really appreciate it. So he turns to burp, of course, and I hit the gas, fly out of the parking lot, the doors flapping in the breeze, and Noah burping after me. And we do it the next day. He lets out a little like test burp, as he's getting out of the car. We do it the next day and he doesn't burp at all. Then I know I can back it up into the body of the time. So the next day I do it again in the car in the middle of the situation because you've got to call it out. And a lot of times people don't recognize the behavior that they want enough. And so I
Mhm.
recognize it again in the car as we're moving along, and he lets out a little test burp, and I ignore it. And then the next day I do it again. He says, "Ah, Mom, I know. I'm so mature. I respect my body. I didn't burp in the car. It's fabulous. I haven't done it in like 3 months." And I'm like, "Oh, it's been like 5 days, but okay." We can move on to the next behavior. But that behavior drove me crazy. So anytime he would do it, I'd be like, no, I'm going to kill you, and it's like, so
Mhm.
those ones that are making you insane. And then you have the ability to love that person a little bit more. You can give them a little more attention and all those things because they're not making you nuts. Works with dogs and husbands as well, just saying.
I love this idea about doing it during transitions. What do
Mhm.
you think is the science behind that, or why does it work so effectively?
Because it hits when they're transitioning from one location to the other, their brain is sort of resetting and it's a little
Mm.
bit off balance at the point. So it doesn't occur to them to demonstrate the behavior again because their
Hmm.
focus was on the other people they're
Yeah.
with. So it works great. So I usually tell parents, like, do it when they're getting on the school bus or when they're leaving from
Hmm.
school or
Yeah.
when you're leaving the room to go get ready for work or whatever. Provide the recognition then. So if it's, your kid getting up on time or being off of video games or whatever it is that is your goal that you're working on or being positive or something like that. But we spend a lot of time recognizing what we don't like instead of recognizing what we do like and what we do want, and you have to recognize it when
Yeah.
it's occurring. So that's a key point. If
Hmm.
we're just saying I wish you would do this or I wish you would do that, especially for kids with anxiety, they're thinking I can never achieve that. Oh my gosh, I'll never be able to live up to those expectations. And it puts a
Hmm.
huge expectation on them. So you've got to recognize it when it's happening.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think it's so valuable to remember to recognize the things you want more of because, energy goes where attention flows or attention goes where energy goes, whatever the Dan Siegel quote is. But it's basically like neurons that fire together wire together. So
Exactly.
whatever you're doing in sync will solidify more. So what are you bringing up? What is the focus? Is it negative attention, positive attention? What
It's
are
like
you
a flower
wanting
in the
more
light.
of?
It's going to grow
Yeah.
towards the light. And the same
Yeah.
thing. And kids are like that all the time. People will say, "How did you get them to change that behavior so quick?" It's not anything special. It's literally my body positioning and how I interact a little bit.
Hmm.
It can be learned. It's very simple, simple techniques.
Yeah, yeah, that's great to
Yeah.
hear. So some of it is very practical.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
yeah, and I really wanted to pick your brain, particularly during this season in the United States. We're going back to school, and I know many parents are seeing increased anxiety for younger kids, but also anxious kids, older anxious kids, meltdowns, resistance, school defiance, restraint collapse. And from your work with highly sensitive kids, neurodiverse kids, what are some of these early signs that a child's difficult behavior might actually be their nervous system protecting them from overwhelm? which feels it's school overwhelm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is the overstimulation of things too. Going back to that schedule, like working your kids into some sort of a schedule prior to the school year starting is really important, but also being aware that it's really hard for some kids to go from 0 to 100. And so when school starts, there's many kids who can't start school, start a sport, and do all of those things right in the first couple weeks of school. That's really, really tough for a lot of kids. So layering things on as they're able to tolerate it is really critical. And being aware that their bodies need more sleep and that's tough this time of year. It's still light out pretty late into into the evening and everything else. So making sure that they're, really protecting them being able to get sleep, using shades, using all those other things, shutting down the overhead lights a couple hours before bedtime, turning off the electronics. I don't think TV is terrible. A lot of parents always ask me, like, what if they just watch TV? I don't, it's different from them being on a video game or being on something that they have to attend to. TV,
Right.
it's not the greatest thing, but it's not going to kill them. I understand we got to do the dishes. We got to take the dogs out. And it's really hard to do
Yeah.
that sometimes. So, bringing all those things down, turning down music, turning down light, making sure the house is cooler, all of those things so that they're prepped to be able to rest and restore and relax and get themselves ready to a point where they can actually fall asleep. Because what ends up happening is the kids are so wired up and they're doing those activities and they go in and lay down, they can't sleep. And it takes them hours to get to sleep at night, especially those first few weeks of school.
Hmm.
Addition to that, making sure that they hydrate. They come home and they're really cranky a lot of the time. Did they drink any water that day? Ask them, like, how many times did you refill your water bottle? Did you drink water today? Because a lot of times, like, especially things like ADHD, the symptoms of it's oftentimes can be caused by dehydration or lack of sleep or processed foods or, lots of other things like that. So just keep in mind too that that's tough for kids. They're not gonna think about that, especially younger kids. Older kids are really good about hydrating, not necessarily with the best things, but hydrating a little bit more. But younger kids, they're not great about doing that. So reminding them about, I want you to drink your water bottle twice today. So make sure you fill it up once at school or something like that so that they know to do
Hmm.
those things because they're very tired at the beginning of the year and checking in with them. Hey, who'd you sit with today at lunch? Who did who are you with outside at recess? If it's your, older students, hey, who did you ride to school with? Who did you talk with in classes? Because they're going to tell you nothing, 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 or what's negative. And a big sign that things are not going well is when they're not interacting with peers. So if they're not interacting
Hmm.
with peers, I mean, you'll probably at the beginning of the school year, usually you get the complaints about the teacher, I don't like this teacher or that teacher because of whatever. But if they're not connecting with peers also, that's a huge red flag that things are off.
Yeah. So what I'm imagining is all of these are stressors, right? Like social pressure, stressor, nutrition and movement, stressor, lack of sleep, stressor, or lack of rest, requirement to focus and follow directions, stressor, being gone
Yep.
from your primary attachment,
Yep.
stressor. So they're doing all this, like their system is really getting stressed and overwhelmed during the day. And then they come home or even in the next morning they're a bit depleted. They're depleted. And it's like our job. I'm almost thinking of first responders. Our job is like to not try to take it personally.
Yeah.
But it's so hard not to because when they start snapping at you after school, what? I thought you had a good day. And then all of a sudden, nothing can be right. Like the mac and cheese is off. Like
Yeah.
the sibling is being so annoying with that
So
noise they're
annoying.
making
Yep.
with their mouth. And, you know,
You're like, is this
somebody
normal? Do
accidentally
you have a
tripped them.
misophonia?
And yeah, yeah. So then they go from like seemingly like fine to an explosion.
Yeah.
So how is that related to the overwhelm if you were to kind of,
It can
because
only take so
yeah.
much stuff. I mean, your system, just like allostatic load for toxins, your body can only take so much stress before it's going to react. And it's should be expected if we don't have other ways to take that pressure off. So, implementing if it's meditation or mindful activities or touch therapy with them, even just sitting with your kiddo and having, your arm around them and those sorts of things petting the dog, all of those sorts of things are going to help to relax that nervous system and get them really more at ease. We do a lot of restorative practices with our students as well as our parents. Like we teach the students and then we're like, go home and teach your mom. And they're like, my mom thought it was great. It was the best night's sleep she ever had. And we're like, yeah, that's the point, because for, a lot of, it's not just the kiddos that are having trouble. The parents are oftentimes struggling with those things as well. So making sure that they're learning techniques that are going to take care of all of them and help to replenish their system. Laughter, trying to make light of things and being sensitive to when it's, someone doesn't think it's funny. And you've got to work with them on that, and in building in some times that are helpful to create for connection, but also helpful for the other things. The academic stuff will come, but getting into that routine of back to school is a lot. It's overwhelming for a lot of kids. They really feel like it's, they're getting to that point, and you can kind of see it. The introverts start to pull into themselves, and you can see it with the jawline. The extroverts tend to puff out. The teens do that too. They puff out a little bit, and you can tell because everything gets bigger. You're looking for the whites above the eyes or the whites below the eyes. Both of those tell you that that
Interesting.
person's getting to the point where they can't take anymore. The white under the under eye means mental instability. The white over the eye means they could be moved to aggression.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm imagining like a cup. We talk about like the full cup for parents, but really for all of us, it's like the cup or whatever, like an energy reserve.
Yeah.
It's very simple, actually, if you think about it that way, right? Like it's either full or it's empty or it's halfway. So it could be with like resourcing, how many resources you have, or also
Right.
like if you think about stress, you can tolerate certain amounts of stress, your window of tolerance. But once you get to the top of the cup, it's going to overflow, and now you're going to blow up, or you're going to self-harm, whatever it is, like external, internal. But there's only, like, it's a finite amount. It's not infinite, right? Whereas I think sometimes as parents, if we don't realize that, we might think, why are you being so snappy?
Right.
As
Yeah.
if it's some like, as if it's a choice, I guess.
Yeah.
Whereas when we reframe it as biology, it's really a biological
Yeah.
system and work.
Right, and there's ways to support that too. I mean, I kind of, cut back on a lot of the stuff from my girls who are pretty young, in the summertime. But I mean, we're starting to move back towards the school year, so I'm like, okay, you got to take your omega 3s and your MCT oils again every day, and we get back into their supplements that they need, and to the vitamin. They're taking their vitamin B, and we're working on those things because those definitely help with their systems of being able to tolerate more stress. So we want to make sure that we're putting into their bodies the things that are going to help with the stress, and hydration. That's a huge one. And that's an easy one for both
Mhm.
parents and educators to encourage. We can't always control what our kids are eating and what's going into their bodies, but we can encourage them to drink more water and that sort of thing. But there's
Mhm.
a ton of other things with supplements that are extremely helpful, that we work with parents and help them to see what things can really be helpful for their youth, and what vitamins and mineral combinations and things like that can be helpful as
Would
well.
you recommend parents, if their child is struggling like with mood regulation or falling asleep on time or just the stuff we've been talking about, is it helpful to go to the pediatrician and ask for blood work on
Yeah,
vitamin, like
yeah.
minerals, nutrients?
Yep. I think it's very, very helpful. Or go to an integrative specialist. They're
Hmm.
gonna be the ones that can really help you with that, because oftentimes doctors are just looking at, is it within the recommended daily allotment? Are they getting the recommended daily amount that they should be? And that doesn't mean that I'm getting enough vitamin B for me.
Hmm.
Everybody's different. They're just looking at it as you're getting
Hmm.
enough vitamin B to sustain life. So I might need a higher level of vitamin B because I have higher levels of anxiety in my body. So my body has
Hmm.
more vitamin B than somebody else's. So working with
Hmm.
an integrative specialist can really help with those pieces, and knowing what's going on with your kiddo. I know my middle daughter has a lot of symptoms of ADHD. She is coded with that. And so there's things that I'm like, okay, she doesn't have enough L-tyrosine in her body, so she needs more. She doesn't, ginkgo biloba helps to oxygenate the front of the brain. I have her do a lot more intense movement because she needs that burst of energy that and those amino acids into the big muscle groups and into the front of the brain. Whereas my younger daughter has a lot more anxiety. She's much more of an introvert. And so for her, rhythmic activities are better and that sort of thing. So knowing
Mhm.
what your kiddo is working with and what they need is strategic because it's not the same for every kid by any.
Yeah. Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I love
definitely
that. And
talk with your
and
doctor.
watching for, go ahead. Mhm.
Yeah, talk with your doctors, talk with, you have access to an integrative specialist, to speak with them too. That's extremely helpful. Extremely.
Mhm. I know occupational therapists are really helpful as well. Of course, when you have a diagnosis, but
Yeah.
also just in general, they seem to be kind of the first line of defense with pediatricians. Like if there's some challenges with behavior, let's go see OT, and maybe even seeing an OT if you can afford it for just a general evaluation, even if you don't kid doesn't have a diagnosis, just to
Right.
see is there some certain. And I like to think of it as play. Really, it's really kind of play. What kind of movements? What kind of play? What kind of activities would be helpful for this unique child, even
Right. And
without a
they're
diagnosis, just to
right.
help.
And I mean, because their whole role is they're looking at the sensory system and trying to see how the sensory system interacts with the external world. So,
Uh-huh.
working with them is always beneficial because they can give you some great tips on how to make your sensory system more happy, more comfortable. And granted,
Uh-huh.
we make growth by putting stress on that and changing. But there is definitely too much stress that can be put on that can be negative to the person's system. And that's unfortunately what sometimes happens at the beginning of a school year, just because so much
Yeah.
happens at once. So
Yes.
trying to layer those things on instead of it being so jarring on, your youth and everything, because they get sick more often right then and those sorts of things. Because
And
they
because of the stress, like we first add the stress, and then their system is overwhelmed with having to metabolize all that. And then on top of that, the germs. So now their immune system is more vulnerable to whatever germs are around. And then, I mean,
absolutely.
generally, I think people think, oh, just being in school spreads germs, but not necessarily. It depends on how strong your immune system is.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. That's a huge factor to it. And, the same thing, if they're under a lot of academic stress, their chances of them, getting sick or showing more signs of mental fatigue or mental stress or emotional need is going to become
Yeah.
obviously higher. So,
Hmm. I've also heard experts talk about, at least one expert mentioning, like, if you don't know exactly what's wrong with like what's going on with your kid back to school, or even if you're in summer still and there's just seems to be a lot of overwhelm, start with proprioceptive input.
oh
I don't know if
yeah.
you have thoughts on that.
Oh,
Is that kind of
I'm
like a
huge
great place
fan,
to,
huge fan.
okay, tell us a little bit more
I'm
about
always
that,
like,
what that,
do not use vestibular in a school setting unless you have a lot of time or it's a high schooler that's tired. If I have a high schooler that's really fatigued, coming in exhausted every day, kind of sleeping through the first few periods of the day, then I'll use vestibular activities. I'll spin them in the chair. I will, I'll have them do that sort of stuff. I'll have them try to bounce on the balls of their feet and all that. Younger kids, absolutely not, because it just winds them up. It's like the
mm,
old theory of like they go to gym class and then they come back and they can't do any work because they're so wound up. That's because they've had a lot of vestibular activity. It's a kid who goes outside and swings on the swing for a couple minutes and gets off and chases a bunch of other kids and is trying to like put hands on those other kids. That's why, because swinging is very vestibular. It can
mhm,
become somatic, but it takes time. But proprioceptive is your friend, and for many reasons. One is it releases endorphins that helps to dull pain, both physical and emotional pain, as well as
mm,
it could dull just, I don't want to go to this class. It can dull the pain from that. So
mm.
proprioceptive is great for that. It also releases serotonin and dopamine, which helps to make you feel successful and connect and feel like you're getting more done and all of those other pieces. So I
And
often
particularly helpful with ADHD diagnoses then as
huge,
well.
huge. Yeah. So like, walking upstairs, that's always my favorite is getting kids to walk up and down stairs. So it could be like, oh, I need you to go upstairs to the library and deliver this. And it could be like a note that says, tell them thank you very much. They are great. They helped you a ton. And then send them, staple it closed, send it back, and then have them do the quick things. I do the same thing with my kids. I'll leave stuff out in my car and be like, oh, I forgot to get my work bag, which is like 50 pounds, and they'll walk out and grab it and haul it in and that sort of thing. But just doing those little task can help. It also oxygenates the front of the brain, like we had talked about for the kid with the intense movement. So it's going to oxygenate the front of the brain and push the amino acids into the large muscle groups. Huge help, huge help. It
Hmm.
gets to,
So these are exercises that put pressure on joints. Is that what it
yeah.
is essentially?
Proprioceptive primarily is that, yeah. So it could be push-ups, pull-ups, moving furniture. I often tell teachers, have them move the furniture around, or I'll tell parents at home,
Redecorate.
move the couch so that you can swiffer underneath or something like that. Have them do those tasks that will help tremendously to get them on track, those proprioceptive movements. Yeah.
Mm. Do you recommend like lifting weights? I mean, I know adults that lift weights, and as a woman in her 40s, I'm supposed to be lifting them as well for bone
Yeah.
density. But what about younger kids like that? I mean, even preteens,
We do,
teenagers.
and we're careful with it because we don't want to obviously damage their bones or their joints and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. I'll tell you, every program we have weighted balls in them, and we play catch with them
Okay.
every day. And we're doing all sorts of different athletic things. Like the big thing that students want to always do is they want to beat me in my time for like being able to stay in a Copenhagen plank on the side, and that, so we're always doing stuff like that, like who can get up and down the staircase in the school quicker, and those sorts of things,
Mm-hmm.
as their bodies definitely need that. And kids don't get as much movement as they did 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago. So in
Mm-hmm.
most cases. So, and a lot of the students I work with they don't have access to a lot of extracurriculars, unfortunately, which are is always the biggest thing I push. But they don't have access to that. So they're not getting that physical movement outside of
Mm-hmm.
school that they would
Mm-hmm.
have received probably 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly trying to incorporate more physical based things. We're not meant as
Yeah.
humans to sit all day long. And that
Mm-hmm.
kids struggle with, adults struggle with that. Anytime I do a training for adults, are always like, oh my God, they need to move. We all need to move.
Yeah. Yeah. And would like running, or kids love to play tag, does that count as proprioceptive because it's their own
And
weight that
so
they're
you might
carrying?
want it more to be on like an incline or something like that if they're
Okay.
doing things. And sometimes we have like weighted balls that are soft, and
Mm-hmm.
like we'll have them play tag, like holding person that has the weighted ball is the person who's it, and they run with the weighted ball and have to tag the others with the weighted ball or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
creatively make it part of, pull up
Yeah.
contest and things like that, or
Yeah.
and hang contests and things like that, of doing
Mm-hmm.
different activities. One, so that they're exposed to movement, and they are exposed to movement that they can incorporate into their own lives, but also so that they can help to move the blood and the oxygen throughout their body. Because that is a huge
Yeah.
factor in behavior and what we see with challenges, and with people being able to really access different areas of their brain and attend and learn.
Hmm. Yeah, and as we were talking about, school, back to school is overwhelming because it's creating more stress. And these types of activities, movement metabolizes stress. It
Yeah.
actually processes overwhelm, even though it's more seemingly work, but it's not forever. And it's active movement, which actually counteracts this. Like if you just plop yourself on the couch after an overwhelming, stressful day, you're not necessarily doing more overwhelming work, but you're also stuck. Is
Yeah,
that right? Your
it is. And your body becomes more.
stress
Yep, your body
toxins.
becomes more acidic and everything
Mhm.
else, which makes everything else not work as good. Your digestive doesn't work as good, all those other things. So you need to, really work with your body to make it do. And we can do that through breathing exercises too. I mean, most
Uh-huh.
of the students I work with are mouth breathers. So we spend a lot of time like trying to get them to breathe through their noses and,
Mm.
exhale more than they inhale. And that's tough for them because most of them they've just that's just kind of the way their mouths are shaped at this point in time and everything else, that they tend to breathe more through their
Interesting.
mouths because they feel like they need more oxygen. So we're trying to retrain them to get the type of oxygen disseminated into their body that they do need, but it needs to go through the nose. Obviously, if they have
Mm.
an issue with their septum or something like that, that's not possible. But
Yeah.
in most
But
cases,
that helps offset that acidity that you were talking about because it creates more neutral,
mhm.
whatever it is, I don't even know. I'm not even going to go into the microbiology, but it balances the system. It like rebalances the
Yeah, and
number
there's
so
different
that,
techniques for doing that, different types of breathing strategies
uh-huh.
and stuff. And I years ago I worked with a high school kid, and I said, "Today we're going to learn how to breathe," and he's like, "I didn't know how to breathe, Dr. B." And I was like, "Yeah, true dat, buddy, true dat. We're going to breathe in a different way."
Yes, yes, yes. In a way that gets you more bang for your buck. Yeah, amazing. So many, I think, important things to highlight. And I know we only have so much time. So, any other kind of final words as we wrap up this conversation? I know it's going to be really helpful for parents who have kids back to school, and also parents. All of this applies to you as well. So, just cookie
Yeah.
cutter, like apply to your nervous system because it's relevant for your body too.
Yeah, water is your friend. It's the biggest regulator for all humans, whether it's drinking water so you can see it or hear it, watching a video
Mhm.
of water, hearing
Mm.
rain, doing the dishes, all those things. Water is a huge regulator. You think about it, you always have that kid that doesn't want to shower. And then when you finally get them in there, then they won't come out. And then when you
Yeah.
are able to be like, other people need to shower too, they finally come out and they're like, "I love you so much. This is so fabulous." Because
A
water is,
spa
yeah,
experience.
water is the natural regulator. If you've got a really
Love
anxious,
that.
kid that's going to school, try to have them take a shower or a bath before they go to school. I know it's tough timing wise, but that will help to level them significantly before. And if
Mm.
you don't have time for that, have them fill the dog water bowl, water plants, those sorts of things. Fill up the water bottles for everybody else. Those real simple techniques will at least help get them into the school in a less stressed state.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I was actually trying to do that with my kids yesterday. I said, "It's still summer, it's hot. Let's go swim." And they were like, "Swim? It's 5:30. It's late." I was like, "It's not too
Gotta
late
go
to
to
swim.
bed.
Listen, like it's a half week. Let's just go have some more fun." And they were like, so today I might try to coerce them into the water just because you
Yeah,
said that.
good for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know this is super, super helpful and very practical tidbits as well. And for anybody that's looking to find out more about your services, where can they find out more about you? And
The
we'll link it
easiest
below as well.
way to find us is at www.thebehaviorbootcamp.com. We're also on most of the social media platforms under the same heading as well. So,
Awesome.
thanks, Diana.
Great. Thank
It's
you. Yeah,
fun.
thank you so much. It's been really great talking to you and picking your brain. And
I
hopefully it
appreciate
was
it
helpful for parents as well.
for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.